The sky over the Colorado foothills looked bruised, purple clouds swelling low, promising snow before sundown. Rhett Holloway rode straight into that wind, jaw clenched, coat snapping behind him like a warning flag. He wasn't a man who wasted daylight, much less patience. And he'd had enough of it already. Someone was living in his abandoned line shack. Tracks in the frost. Smoke from a crooked chimney. Prints too small to belong to grown men. Ranch hands whispered drifters, thieves, runaways. Rhett didn't care which. They were on his land. That meant one thing. They were leaving. He swung off his horse and stomped toward the warped wooden door. "Open up," he barked. No answer. Just a shuffle inside, quick, light, like something fragile trying to hide. Rhett shoved the door hard enough that the hinges screamed. The scene froze him mid-stride. Inside, lantern light flickered over a narrow room, and a young woman standing like a shield. Her arms spread wide. Her body trembling but firm. Behind her, crammed into the shadows like a cluster of frightened sparrows, were children. Dozens of wide eyes, dirt-streaked cheeks, quivering shoulders. Not drifters. Not thieves. Children. 11 of them. Mira Callan didn't move. "Don't come any closer," she warned, her voice hoarse but steady. "They're scared." Rhett stared at her, at them, at the impossible sight cluttered into his forgotten shack. "This is private land," he snapped. "You don't get to." One of the smallest boys stepped out from behind Myra's skirt. His lower lip shook. He looked no older than 6. A knitted cap, too big, slid down over his brow. "Please, sir," he whispered. "We'll be good. Just don't let him find us." Rhett frowned. "Find you? Who?" Mira turned sharply. "Don't say another word." But the boy didn't listen. Fear made him bold. "Braddock," he breathed. "Silas Braddock's coming." The air snapped like a pulled wire. Rhett stiffened. A muscle jumped in his jaw. That name, Braddock, carried history like a buried thorn. Old grudges, deeper mistakes, years of silence and decay. Hearing it now from a trembling child was like a fist to the ribs. Mira saw the change in his face. "You know him," she said quietly. Rhett didn't answer. Instead, he surveyed the shack, thin walls, patched roof, barely any firewood stacked. The children huddled together, too quiet, too still. Their clothes didn't match, some soot-stained, some torn, some obviously borrowed. Their skin carried smudges of smoke that hadn't washed off. "What happened?" Rhett demanded. "We're not your concern," Mira fired back. "We just needed shelter for the night. We'll be gone before sunrise." "That's not how this works." "It's exactly how it works," she said. "Because if Braddock finds them first, he'll claim them. And no one, not the sheriff, not the judge, not the townfolk, will question him." Rhett didn't like the way her voice cracked on the word claim. He didn't like the way the children flinched when the wind hit the walls. He didn't like the faint smell of old smoke clinging to their clothes, like they'd run from something burning. "Start talking," Rhett growled. Mira held his stare, but her body trembled from exhaustion. "There was a fire," she said. "The boarding house where they lived. It wasn't an accident. And until I can prove it, until I can reach someone who will listen, I have to keep them hidden." "Hidden on my land." Rhett snapped. "You think I'm some charity?" "No," her voice softened. "But you look like a man who's lost sleep over something. So maybe you understand what it means to protect what's left." That cut deeper than she meant it to. Rhett stepped back, exhaling hard. Snowflakes drifted through the doorway, slow and silent. The storm was building. Fast. "You have 5 minutes to explain why Braddock's name just came out of that boy's mouth," he said, voice low. "Before I decide what happens next." Mira lifted her chin, ready to speak. Ready to unravel a truth that would tangle itself into Rhett's past, whether he wanted it or not. But a distant sound interrupted her. The crunch of wagon wheels. On frozen ground. Approaching. Rhett's eyes snapped to the window. Myra's face drained of color. "He found us," she whispered. The wagon wheels groaned closer, slow and methodical, like whoever drove them wanted their presence felt. Rhett stepped toward the cracked window, but Mira lunged first, blowing out the lantern with a sharp puff. The shack fell into dim gray, lit only by the dying daylight seeping through warped boards. "Don't move," she whispered to the children. "Don't breathe loud." Rhett shot her a look. "If that's Braddock." "It's not him," Mira whispered quickly, listening. "His team travels heavier. That's just a freight wagon heading toward town." Rhett listened. She was right. The sound passed, faded, vanished into the hills. Rhett exhaled, tension easing just enough for the children to unfreeze. But the room hadn't softened. It remained tight, fear-soaked. "All right," Rhett growled. "Start talking. What fire? What happened? And why there are 11 children hiding in my shack like hunted animals?" Mira steadied herself. The kids gathered around her like her shadow. "They came from the Callan boarding house," she said quietly. "I taught there. Lived there." Rhett eyed their soot-stained clothes. "I'm guessing it didn't burn down from a cooking accident." She shook her head. Someone locked the back door before the fire started. One of the older boys, a wiry, sharp-eyed child with a defensive posture, spoke up. Miss Mira broke the window with a chair. Pulled us out one at a time. A tiny girl beside him nodded, lip trembling. She cut her hands on the glass but kept going. Rhett glanced at Myra's bandaged palms. "You walked them through the night?" "2 nights," Mira corrected softly. "We hid in a creek bed the first day. They were tracking us." "They?" Rhett pressed. Mira hesitated. Her throat bobbed. "Braddock's men." A cold spike pierced Rhett's gut. Why would Silas Braddock want kids? Mira met his gaze. Because he wants leverage. Control. The Orphans boarding house received state funds. Money Braddock was skimming through a proxy. Ruining the home means the children get relocated. Quietly. Without question. "And you're saying he wants to, what? Claim them?" Her voice turned thin. "The law doesn't ask where kids go when there's no guardian left. Braddock's paid men to escort children to work camps before." The smallest boy whimpered. Mira pulled him close, rubbing his back. "I wasn't going to let that happen again." Rhett's chest tightened. He knew Braddock's greed. Knew his ruthlessness. He'd witnessed it firsthand years ago. Back when he'd kept quiet, believing it wasn't his fight. Silence stretched. A long, heavy one. Rhett finally stepped back, running a hand over his face. "Look, you can't stay here." Mira raised her head sharply. "We'll leave at dawn." "I didn't say you could stay that long," he muttered. But something in his tone had changed. Even the kids heard it. Their trembling eased. Slightly. Outside, a gust of wind slammed into the shack, rattling the loose planks. Snow hissed across the ground like sand. The storm was rolling in hard. "You planning to take them out into that?" Rhett asked. "We've survived worse," Mira said, but her voice shook with exhaustion. A boy coughed. Deep, rough, not the cough of a healthy child. Rhett's eyes narrowed. "How long since they've eaten?" Mira hesitated, jaw tightening. "Yesterday afternoon." Rhett turned toward his horse. "I've got jerky in the saddlebag. Flour back at the main house. I'll get." No, Mira stepped between him and the door. If you leave, they'll panic. They think every sound means Braddock found them. As if on cue, one of the girls burst into tears. Mira knelt, murmuring soft assurances. Rhett stood there, every instinct warring inside him. His rules, his land, his order, against the raw truth staring him in the face. These weren't squatters. They were survivors. Rhett's voice came out low, begrudging, rough. You can stay tonight. Only tonight. Storm's too strong. The children sagged with relief. Mira didn't. She looked at him steadily. Thank you. But tomorrow? What then? Rhett didn't answer. He couldn't. Because he didn't know. The wind picked up, howling through the pines like a warning neither of them wanted to hear. And in that mournful sound, one undeniable truth pressed in on Rhett. If Braddock truly was hunting these children, tomorrow might not be a choice at all. Snow began falling in hard, slanted sheets, thick enough that the world outside the shack disappeared into white. The storm swallowed the last of the daylight, leaving only the faint glow of embers and the shallow breaths of 11 exhausted children. Rhett Holloway hated storms. Too many memories hid in weather like this. He tore his eyes from the window and knelt by the fire pit, striking flint until sparks caught the thin kindling Mira had gathered. This place wasn't built to handle a night like this, he muttered. Roof leaks. Walls drafty. Could use a full overhaul. Mira hovered a step behind the children, watching him with guarded suspicion. We didn't plan to stay more than an hour. The storm hit faster than expected. That's the weather out here, Rhett said. Never asks permission. He added a few thicker logs. The fire brightened, warming the children's faces. They edged closer, still wary of him but drawn to the heat. Mira exhaled in relief. Quiet, subtle, but Rhett caught it. He wasn't sure why that bothered him. He stepped back, brushing snow off his coat. I'll patch the roof. If it gives in tonight, this whole shack's coming down. You're helping us? Mira asked cautiously. Don't read too much into it, he grunted. Snowload'll cave it in, that's all. But her brow lifted, like she could see right through him. He ignored it and grabbed an old bucket, setting it under a major drip. Keep the little ones back from the walls. Cold settles hardest along the edges. Mira nodded and gently organized the children into a tighter circle near the fire. The smallest girl tugged Rhett's sleeve. He froze. She held out something. Small, wooden, crudely carved. A tiny horse. My brother made it, she whispered. For you. 'Cause you saved us. Rhett swallowed hard. I didn't save you. You brought fire, she said simply. Myra's eyes softened. Rhett cleared his throat and took the toy. Tell your brother thank you. The girl smiled, just barely, before scampering back. Rhett turned toward the leaking roof before Mira could say anything that might unravel him further. Outside the shack, wind roared like a living thing. Rhett climbed onto the half-rotted lean-to and began layering pine boughs and old saddle blankets over the worst gaps. Snow stung his eyes. His fingers numbed. But he worked fast, focused, jaw tight. Below him, Mira opened the door just enough to call out, You'll freeze out there. Rhett didn't look down. Wouldn't be the first time. Why are you doing this? She pressed, voice almost lost to the wind. I don't want a dozen kids buried because my roof failed, he said flatly. But even as he said it, something pried at him from inside. Something older than this storm, older than Myra's questions. Guilt. Years of it. When he climbed down, Mira was still standing in the doorway, hugging herself against the cold. You're not what I expected, she murmured. Rhett brushed past her, stamping snow off his boots. I don't care what people expect. But Mira didn't drop it. You're helping. Even if you pretend you're not. He gave her a hard look. Don't make this something it isn't. She held his gaze for a beat, then nodded. Fine. But her expression said she didn't entirely believe him. Inside, the storm battered the shack, but the fire held. The children ate the jerky he divided evenly, chewing slowly, eyes drooping from exhaustion. Mira patched the older boy's coat. Rhett reinforced the door with a broken chair leg. For a moment, a fleeting, thin moment, there was something almost peaceful in the cramped, shabby room. Until Mira spoke softly. Rhett, about Braddock. He stiffened at the name. You knew him once, she said. The way your face changed when the children mentioned him. That wasn't surprise. Rhett's fist tightened around the wooden toy in his pocket. He's not a man you can run from, Rhett said quietly. If he's involved, he'll come looking. Myra's breath hitched. The children instinctively moved closer to her. And Rhett realized, whether he wanted to be or not, he'd already stepped into their fight. He couldn't walk away from this storm. Or the one Braddock would bring. Get some rest, Rhett said gruffly. Tomorrow, we figure out what happens next. But inside, his chest tightened with a truth he didn't want to face. Tomorrow might break everything. By dawn, the storm had swallowed half the foothills. Snow draped the pines so heavily their branches bowed like mourners. The shack creaked under the weight of ice and wind, but it still stood. Patched, reinforced, warmed by a fire that hadn't died once through the night. Rhett Holloway stepped outside first. Cold bit into his skin like teeth. He scanned the tree line, looking for tracks, Braddock's men, riders, anyone foolish enough to be out in this storm. All he found were the faint depressions of deer hooves and a drifting fog rising from the meadow. For a moment, the peace felt unnerving. He wasn't used to silence feeling dangerous. Inside, the children were stirring. Mira knelt beside the fire, coaxing it back to full strength. A soft hum vibrated in her throat, a tune meant to calm. The children leaned into it without thinking. Rhett watched her for a breath too long. He shook it off. Roof's holding, he said. But I need to brace the back wall before the snow shifts. Mira stood, rubbing her palms. I'll help. You'll stay with the kids. He tossed her a half-playful, half-serious glare. Or they'll wander out here and freeze solid. She folded her arms. I can swing a hammer, rancher. A muffled laugh came from one of the older boys. Rhett sighed. All right. But the little ones stay put. A chorus of yes, ma'am, answered Mira. Rhett didn't miss it. They didn't say yes, sir to him. Not yet. Behind the shack, the snow piled waist-high. Rhett shoveled out a narrow trench while Mira held a lantern low. Each breath hung in the air like smoke. You're quiet today, Mira observed, watching him drive a board against the wall. I'm working. That's not what I meant. Rhett hammered harder. Talk wastes heat. You said something last night, she pushed gently. About Braddock. About not being able to run from him. He paused. Just one beat. But she caught it. What did he do to you, she asked. Rhett didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he said, Braddock doesn't break the law. He bends it, pays it, owns it, and after a while, folks stop asking what he's doing in the shadows. Myra's jaw tightened. That's how he got away with the fire. Rhett's hammer froze mid-swing. You're certain he said it? I saw one of his riders near the back door that night. A man with a limp and a scar across his ear. He visits Braddock's ranch often. Rhett lowered the hammer slowly. He knew that man. Too well. A gust of cold wind cut through the silence, scattering snow across their boots. This wall's done, Rhett said abruptly. Let's get wood before the weather turns again. But Mira saw the truth in his eyes. Braddock wasn't just some rival to Rhett. He was a ghost Rhett had never put to rest. Later, inside the shack, Rhett showed one of the older boys how to wedge kindling properly. The boy mimicked him with surprising precision. "What's your name?" Rhett asked. "Jonas." The boy mumbled. "Miss Mira says I gotta learn real skills." Rhett smirked. "She's right." Jonas puffed with pride, then coughed sharply into his elbow. A rough, deep cough. Rhett frowned. "You been sick long?" Jonas shrugged. "Since the creek bed. Water was cold." Mira overheard. "He's improving. But they all need real shelter and real food soon." Rhett agreed silently. His land could provide that. His resources could. But giving them safety meant one thing: defying Braddock openly. And once he crossed that line, there was no turning back. That evening, as the storm slacked to soft snowfall, Mira sat beside Rhett near the fire. The children slept piled together, their breaths slow and even. "You said Braddock bends the law," Mira whispered. "If he's from your past, you know how he thinks. We could stop him." "No," Rhett's voice was hard. "Braddock doesn't stop. He consumes. You cross him and he burns you down. I've seen it." Mira leaned in. "Not in romance yet, but in understanding. Then we don't face him alone." Rhett didn't answer. He couldn't. Because he knew the truth. If Braddock wanted these children, he was already on his way. And Rhett's past mistakes were about to collide with his present all over again. By the time the storm broke, the foothills glittered under a pale winter sun, a deceptive calm masking the tension that had thickened overnight. Rhett Holloway saddled his horse before dawn, Mira watching him with tight, worried eyes. "You're sure going into town is wise?" she whispered, careful not to wake the children. "Supply wagons won't make it up here for days," Rhett said. "You need food, medicine. And if Braddock's men are sniffing around, I want to hear it from the source." Mira stepped closer, voice low. "If he finds out you're helping us." Rhett tightened the cinch. "No one in this county tells Braddock no. Someone ought to try." She studied him, really studied him. And something like reluctant trust flickered in her eyes. Rhett mounted and rode out, leaving the shack tucked in the shadow of the pines. In Dry Creek, the town buzzed like an anthill kicked open. Men clustered near the mercantile porch, whispering behind gloved hands. Women stopped sweeping stoops, glancing at Rhett with narrowed eyes. "Morning," Rhett muttered as he passed. They didn't respond. At the general store, he tied off his horse and stepped inside. The bell chimed. Silence greeted him. Even the storekeeper, old May Whitcomb, paused mid-shelf, squinting at him through spectacles. "So it's true," she said, voice tight. "You've brought trouble on your land." Rhett lifted an eyebrow. "I brought supplies." Trouble rode in on its own. May crossed her arms. "Folks say you're harboring strangers. Thieves. Runaways." Rhett's jaw worked. Folks should mind their own business. "Well, Braddock seems mighty interested in that business," May hissed. "He came through this morning asking questions. Hard ones." Rhett froze. "He was here." May lowered her voice to a hush. "With 2 riders. They left heading north. Toward your land." Rhett's pulse hammered. He forced his voice steady. "What did he say?" "He said someone burned down a boarding house in the city. Claimed the orphans escaped. Said they're dangerous. That he's trying to retrieve them for the good of the territory." Rhett nearly laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Kids. Dangerous." May shrugged helplessly. "People listen when a man like Braddock talks." Rhett leaned across the counter. Did you tell him anything about my shack? May shook her head. Only that the storms made writing impossible. She hesitated. Rhett, what's going on? Before he could answer, the bell above the door jingled again. Boots pounded across the wooden floor. Silas Braddock filled the doorway like a storm cloud. Tall, fur-lined coat, eyes hard enough to split stone. 2 men flanked him, rifles slung casually. Too casually. Well, well, Braddock drawled. Holloway. Just the man I hoped to see. Rhett tensed. You're far from home, Silas. Had business in town, Braddock replied smoothly. Seems some orphans ran off from their caretakers. Thought they might have stumbled into your territory. Rhett held his stare. Haven't seen any. Braddock smiled, a slow, snake-like curl. Funny thing, people talk. They say you've been riding near the old line shack. Fire is burning all night. Unusual for a place no one lives in. Rhett's hand hovered near his coat, where his holstered revolver waited. Storm made me check fences. That's all. Braddock stepped closer. If those children are on your land, Holloway, you'd best turn them over. They're not yours to keep. They're not yours either, Rhett snapped. The store went silent. Even the dust motes seemed to freeze midair. Braddock's eyes narrowed. Careful. You know what happens to men who stand in my way. Rhett's voice dropped to gravel. I'm not the same man I was years ago. Braddock studied him, calculating, measuring. Then he smirked. We'll see. He turned, coat sweeping the floor like a curtain closing on a stage, and strode out. His riders followed. Their horses thundered down Main Street. May whispered, trembling. Rhett, what are you getting yourself into? Rhett didn't answer. He couldn't. Because he knew Braddock wasn't riding home. He was riding toward the children. Back at the shack, Mira paced while the children dozed. The older boy watched the door anxiously. Mira kept checking the window. He should have been back by now, she murmured. A sudden crunch of snow outside made the children startle. Mira moved in front of them, shielding them again, body tense. A shadow moved behind the frosted window. Not Rhett. Not the children. Not safety. Night settled over the ranch like a heavy quilt, thick with quiet. The wind had died down, the coyotes gone silent, and the stars stretched sharp and endless across the black sky. But inside the cabin, now warm with fresh timber, patched windows and a sturdy door, sleep refused to come. Elias sat by the small iron stove, its fire clicking softly, throwing gentle orange light across the room where the orphans slept in a jumble of blankets. Their chests rose and fell with steady breaths. Even Charlie, still bruised but healing fast, lay curled under a quilt Lena had stitched earlier that evening. But Annie couldn't sleep either. She approached quietly, her hands wrapped around a cup of steam-thin tea. Fire's burnin' low, she whispered, offering him the cup. He shook his head. I'm plenty warm. Not talkin' 'bout the cold, she murmured. Elias looked at her then, really looked. The shadows softened her face, but her eyes were sharp with worry. You're thinkin' loud, she said gently. He huffed a bitter little breath. Seems I can't think quietly any more. She sat on the stool beside him. It's Sawyer, isn't it? Elias nodded. Man's got power. And friends with deeper pockets. He won't just give up his claim. Even though it ain't rightfully his. She asked. When's that ever stopped a greedy man? His jaw worked. If he's tellin' the marshal the Devereaux deed is lost, he's hopin' he can run this out long enough for public auctions to clear out the rest of the contested land. It's how ranch thieves work. Paperwork and patience. Annie's fingers tightened around her cup. Then we need proof. Somethin' he can't talk his way around. That's the trouble. Proof burned with Mama and Pa. Elias rubbed his hands together. Only thing left is the truth in Sawyer's own head, and that man's a stone wall. Annie studied him. You still think he had something to do with that fire? My gut ain't softened. Elias leaned back, eyes following the firelight. My folks were stubborn, too stubborn to sell out. Sawyer hated that. He wanted these acres bad enough to fight over 'em for months. But a fire doesn't start on its own in the dead of night, in a house built fresh with treated lumber. Annie whispered, You think he said it or had someone do it? I think men do terrible things when they believe they'll never get caught. Silence pressed between them. She reached out, placing her hand over his. You're carryin' a lot alone. I ain't alone, he said before he could stop himself. Her eyes softened. Then let us stand with you. Elias swallowed hard and looked toward the door as a faint crunch of footsteps broke the still night. Annie froze. You hear that? He nodded once. Quiet. Serious. Elias stood, pulling on his coat and grabbing his rifle from behind the stove. Stay with the children, he murmured. But Annie rose too fast for him to stop. Elias, you can't go out there alone. He opened the door just enough to peer outside. The moon, fat and bright, washed over the yard, and there, only 20 paces away, a figure moved along the fence line. A lantern flickered in the stranger's hand. Elias stepped out, boots silent on the cold earth. You're trespassing, he called. The lantern swung up, lighting a familiar face beneath a dusty hat. Marshal Briggs lifted both hands. Easy, Elias. Elias lowered his rifle a fraction. You creepin' around folks' land at midnight for sport now? Briggs grimaced. Wish it was that simple. He approached slowly. I have reason to believe Sawyer ain't just after your land. He's after the kid, too. Elias stiffened. Why? Briggs lowered his voice. Sawyer filed a complaint claiming these children are part of a vagabond ring trespassing with intent to steal. Claims he's got witnesses. If that sticks, the county'll take the children, scatter him. Annie gasped behind Elias. Elias stepped forward, voice dark with fury. He's tryin' to rip him away so nobody can stand in his way. Briggs nodded grimly. And he's makin' a move tomorrow mornin'. Thought you should know before he shows up with paperwork and deputies. The fire inside Elias lit hotter than any stove. Tomorrow. Sawyer will come tomorrow. And this time, Elias wasn't going to be caught unprepared. The morning sun cut through the icy fog like a blade. Snow crunched underfoot as Rhett Holloway rode back toward the line shack, heart pounding. Each step of the horse seemed to echo his own dread. He didn't know what he'd find, only that he'd already failed once in his life by standing silent while Braddock burned through lives. Not this time. The shack came into view, half buried in snow, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. Relief didn't last. The door was ajar. Footprints scattered chaotically in the yard. Small ones. Too small to panic alone. Children. Rhett called, voice low and steady. From the tree lane, Mira appeared, hauling a quivering Jonas along by the hand. Behind her, the other children clustered together, shivering in thin clothes. Their faces lit with fear at his approach. Rhett dismounted, boots crunching the snow. What happened? Myra's jaw tightened. I couldn't trust him, not after what you told me last night. I didn't know if you'd side with Braddock, or if silence would let history repeat itself. So I took them into the woods. Away from everything. Away from you, if necessary. Rhett's chest tightened. Away from me. His voice was softer now, but it carried the weight of guilt years in the making. Mira, my silence then let him rise. I swore I wouldn't make that mistake again. I can't let him take them. Mira studied him, her eyes questioning. Can I trust you? I'll prove it, he said, his jaw firm, eyes blazing. Not with words. With action. Snow crunched behind them. Braddock's riders were already approaching the tree lane, dark shapes moving with precision, intent clear even from a distance. Rhett grabbed Myra's arm. We need to move fast. Together they led the children along a narrow ridge, the wind whipping snow into icy knives. Rhett scooped up the youngest, cradling him in his coat. Mira kept the older ones in line, arms linked, voices steady in song to calm them. Ahead, the creek appeared, ice cracking dangerously along its edges. Braddock's men reached the ridge just as Rhett skidded to a halt. He scanned the frozen water, then glanced back at the children. No choice, we cross here. Myra's eyes widened. It's thin. I know, Rhett growled. Step carefully. Follow me. They edged across, Rhett testing each patch of ice before stepping onto it. The children froze with each crack, hearts hammering. Mira gripped Jonas tighter, whispering encouragement. Rhett moved ahead, steadfast. One misstep and the ice would give. Halfway across, a loud snap echoed through the valley. One of Braddock's men cursed as a branch broke nearby, alerting the rest. Rhett's mind raced. He reached the far side and guided the children, one by one, with Mira keeping pace. Finally, all were across. Rhett turned to face Braddock, chest heaving, eyes blazing with righteous fury. You're finished, Silas. Braddock's smug grin faltered. You think this ends here? Rhett didn't answer with words. He lifted a hand, and the next moments passed in movement. Children safe behind them, townsfolk emerging from behind pines, armed and resolute. Braddock realized too late that his influence ended where courage and justice met. By the time Braddock and his men retreated, the children were safe, bundled in blankets, laughing quietly as their fear ebbed. Mira leaned against Rhett, exhaustion written across her face. You saved them, she whispered. No, Rhett said, voice tight. We saved them, together. Silence fell for a moment, filled only by the crackle of the thawing ice creek. Rhett turned to Mira, eyes softer than they'd been in years. I promise. I'll protect them. Publicly. No more hiding. No more fear. She nodded, tears shining in the corners of her eyes. And I'll stand by you. But this time, let's do it right. The children gathered around, small hands linking to form a chain of safety, trust, and belonging. Rhett knelt to their level, giving Jonas back his carved wooden horse. The boy's smile was shy but real. As the sun broke through the morning fog, Rhett looked over the ridge toward the town. Word would spread. People would see the truth. Braddock's lies would unravel, and justice, long delayed, would finally take root. Mira rested her hand on his shoulder. Thank you for not letting history repeat itself. Rhett's eyes softened, haunted by what had been, but brightened by what could be. No. Thank you for trusting even when you didn't have to. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his past mistakes lift, replaced by a new purpose. Shelter, protection, and a family he chose to fight for. And as the snow began to melt in the morning light, the orphans laughed. Genuine, unguarded, safe at last. Spring had begun to creep into the Colorado foothills, though snow still lingered in shaded hollows. The Holloway Ranch, once quiet and isolated, hummed with life. The line shack had been replaced with a sturdier cabin, freshly painted and insulated, smoke curling lazily from a proper chimney. Children's laughter carried through the pines, mingling with the clink of hammer against wood, the shuffle of boots, and the occasional bark of a watchful dog. Rhett Holloway stood at the edge of the new yard, surveying the progress with a rare smile. Mira crouched beside the youngest, teaching him how to hammer a nail safely. The older children worked on building a small garden, hauling stones, and digging rows with meticulous care. For the first time in years, Rhett felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. Not gone, but steady and purposeful. "Rhett," Mira called softly, pointing toward a cluster of townsfolk approaching along the snowy path. Sheriff Callan, May Whitcomb, and several other neighbors carried sacks of seeds, blankets, and tools. Even a few skeptical ranchers came, curious to see the truth for themselves. Rhett's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance, whispers, and judgment. But the expressions on the townsfolk's faces were ones of cautious support, the kind that could grow into acceptance. Mira approached him, brushing snow from her coat. "They're here to help," she said. "Not to ask questions. They saw what Braddock tried to do, and now they want to make it right." Rhett's eyes softened, the tension in his shoulders easing. "About time," he muttered, a hint of a grin breaking through. Together they worked alongside the children, neighbors lending a hand where strength was needed. Rhett handed shovels, Mira distributed seeds, and the children scurried to plant rows of vegetables and flowers. Laughter bubbled over the crunch of gravel, the rhythm of hammers, and the scrape of rakes against dirt. One of the younger girls tugged on Rhett's sleeve. "Mr. Holloway, what's this?" she asked, holding up a small plank of wood with a rough sketch of a house and a heart drawn around it. Rhett knelt, smiling faintly. "That's our new home. A place for all of you. And for anyone else who needs it." Jonas, holding the carved horse Rhett had given him weeks ago, piped up. "Can we name it?" Mira glanced at Rhett, her gaze gentle but insistent. "Go on," she encouraged. Rhett's eyes scanned the children's eager faces. "Holloway Home," he said quietly. "A place to be safe. A place to grow." The children cheered. They gathered around the plank of wood, hammering it into the ground with laughter and squeals, their shouts carrying across the yard and into the woods. Mira stepped closer to Rhett, voice soft. "You kept your promise." "I did," he said, watching the children scatter with renewed joy. "And I'll keep it for as long as I live." The warmth in the air felt different now, no longer just from the fire inside the cabin, but from a shared sense of family, belonging, and community. Neighbors pitched in to build extra beds, construct desks for lessons, and plant more gardens. What had begun as a lined shack hidden in fear had grown into a refuge, a school, and a home. Rhett finally allowed himself to sit on the porch, Mira by his side. The children played around them, snow melting into rivulets of promise and life. He exhaled, the tension of months, years, lifting, replaced with hope. Mira rested her head briefly on his shoulder. "We did it," she whispered. Rhett's eyes scanned the horizon. No Braddock, no shadows, just the morning sun reflecting off the new life they'd built together. "We did it," he echoed. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that some mistakes could be redeemed. Holloway Home, swaying gently in the morning breeze. 11 children stood beneath it, laughing, arms linked in unbroken bonds. Behind them, Rhett and Mira watched, silent guardians of this newfound family, their hearts tethered to the promise of safety, love, and the life they'd chosen to protect. The mountains, once silent witnesses to fear and sorrow, now echoed with joy. And in that echo, the past finally found its rest. Did Rhett and Mira do the right thing in protecting those children? Comment below and tell us what you would have done. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss our next heart-stopping frontier story.